Good afternoon and hello, everyone, and welcome to another Flycast Partners webcast. Today, our topic is going to be on zero trust device security in the next normal, importance of patch management. Before we get started, I just want to introduce Flycast Partners. Flycast Partners offers best-in-class implementation services and training in IT service management, IT asset management, IT operations management, IT security, enterprise service management, workload automation spaces using ITIL best practices. Please feel free to reach out to us at 844-FLYCAST, that's 844-359-2278, or chat with us live on our website Monday through Friday during normal business hours Eastern Time from 7:30 a.m. from 8:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, or email us at info@flycastpartners.com. Now, before I turn this over to John, we do have a couple poll questions we want to ask because we want to try and get an idea where our audience stands today. For our first question, do you have an automated patching solution in place today? And so go ahead and respond. We're going to give this about a minute or so, give everyone an opportunity to go ahead and respond, and we'll take a look at what our results are. So far, it says a lot of you do have that. So keep sending your questions in. Folks, we want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy day to join us. We know that everyone has a lot going on in IT today. Quite a few things that you're juggling, I'm sure. So thank you for your time. Wow, an overwhelming number of you say yes. It's as we continue to see the results come in. So keep putting those results in there. We'll give it about 20 more seconds, and then we'll do one more quick poll, and we'll turn it over to John. So far, we've got most of you have voted. So keep those votes coming in, folks. Keep them coming. All right, we have 100% of you have voted. So let's go ahead and close, and let's take a look at what our results are today. It's showing here that 88% of you are currently saying yes, you do have something in place today. All right, so let's go to our next question. One more quick question, and we'll turn it over to John. If so, does this include bring your own device? And I know a lot of people, you probably weren't really thinking about that as hard as you were before the pandemic, but I'm sure a lot of you have really taken that in consideration since so many people are using their own devices. So let's see, we've got a lot of you that have responded, said yes so far. About 40% of you have voted. So let's keep those numbers coming in, folks. We'll give it another 40 seconds or so. So does this policy include bring your own device? How many of you have policies in place for protecting those devices that are out there for all these different devices people are using? Another 30 seconds or so, and we'll close down the poll. It's kind of a mixed bag now. About a third of you guys say you don't have anything in place for that. So oh, it just jumped up. More of you submitting. About 10 more seconds. We've got a lot of you voted now. And we're about to close the poll. We've got about 80% of you have voted now. So we'll go ahead and close our poll out, and let's share those results. Let's see. Let's close, and we're going to share, and about 60% of you say yes. So a good majority of you have said yes. So that's great. That's good to hear. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the screen and turn everything over to none other than John Pastorino,
hello, everyone. Today
our
I want
COO
to
at
say that we're
Flycast
honored to have two
Partners.
very distinguished panel
And John will
members
make the
who possess years
introductions.
of experience in the information security vertical. First, I'd like to introduce Bill Harrod from Ivanti. Bill's the Chief Technology Officer for Ivanti's public sector. And prior to joining Ivanti, he was a senior SME and senior manager with Deloitte in their cyber risk practice, and also senior principal consultant with CA Technologies in their government security practice. Bill is also a certified information security professional CISP. And also on our panel is Admiral David Simpson. He's retired. While on active duty, Admiral Simpson is responsible for information services for U.S. forces in Iraq, combat systems, crisis communications afloat, and other deployed assets in the United States, Europe, Africa, Asia, and South America. Since his retirement, Admiral Simpson served as the Chief of Federal Communication Commission's Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. And in this capacity, he is responsible for technology transformation, disaster preparedness, emergency management, and cybersecurity for the agency charged with oversight of over 30,000 commercial enterprises or companies. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. It's truly appreciated. And I know, like we've talked about and prior to this conversation, we've had conversations about cybersecurity. We had conversations about, some of the challenges facing, SLED and Fed enterprises. And I just recently read something that talked about 71% of IT professionals think that patching and kind of the cyber maintenance of their enterprises is somewhat cumbersome, and it's really takes a back seat to their primary duties in a lot of cases. So in saying that, and one of the last thing I want to say is, and it seems the challenges have gotten more and more based upon the remote workforce. And COVID has obviously impacted everybody, some good, some bad. But it's been a challenge for IT professionals because now we have multiple devices try to access the environments simultaneously, and we don't know if we have control over those devices. So in saying that, and Admiral, I'd like to start with you, please. If from your perspective and from your experience, like what are you seeing challenges from a information system perspective at the state level? And then if and the second part of that is, how do you think that we could do more with less? Oh, sir, you're on mute.
Yeah, great questions, John, and you're asking the right questions. I would offer first that it's so important to patch. If you're not patching continuously as soon as patches are available, you're just leaving yourself wide open because the threat actors are so good at their what we call OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, right? At scanning the environment, seeing the vulnerability, and then acting upon it. That's increasingly machine oriented for them. So it's machine to machine. That the human hacker doesn't need to be in that loop for them to gain their first access. So it's important to patch. But the second piece of it, the real challenge is that we have such a heterogeneous cyber universe right now at the state and local, any major enterprise level, where the uh, internet of vulnerable things is more than just your IT. It's what your IT interconnects with, right? It's that large data set. It's the smart TVs that you've connected to your Wi-Fi to have the status board up on the wall. It's the sensors and the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning within your buildings that are interconnected. So it really gets to the point where just knowing what and when to patch, if you're doing that manually, and each vertical that owns that system, you're probably spending too much time doing it, and you're probably late in your patching efforts, creating vulnerabilities. So I think, how do you save money? Automate that piece, right? Treat that as a service, and make sure that you're focused on maintaining a current inventory of your cyber universe, of the things that might be attacked, and then have a dedicated program to ensure that those systems that are interdependent with each other are regularly, continuously patched.
Okay, thank you, sir. And then, Bill, let me ask you a question on top of that. I know that right now you've published articles on zero trust. You've done a lot of things within the community to educate, end users on the importance of zero trust, and something the Admiral just mentioned, with all these different types of assets, things we never considered before touching the internet. Can you elaborate a little bit more about the importance of zero trust and some of the things that you've talked to IT professionals about in some of your articles, please?
Sure, John, thanks. And at Ivanti, we were really pleased to be selected as one of the only unified endpoint management solution providers to be accepted as a collaborator for the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence run by NIST for zero trust architecture. And defense in depth is not new for IT security specialists, but we're really taking defense in depth to a much more fine-grained level. Zero trust is really all about ensuring that there is no inherited trust anywhere on the network. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I made the analogy of a museum, right? So in DC, you walk into one of the Smithsonian's, and in many cases, there are guards at the front door, and maybe you walk through and they check your bag, but there are not guards everywhere in the museum. If you go into something like the Met in New York, there's a guard in every room, or at least in the doorway, to look at, two rooms at the same time. There is no inherited trust once you get inside the museum, right? There is somebody that does authorization each time you leave one room and move to the next. And that's really what we're looking at with zero trust is how do we do that authentication and authorization at each point, each time the transaction or the application changes, and how do we provide that fine granularity, that segmentation at the speed of the internet, and being able to do that is really critical in making sure that we're protecting from being able to move with impunity across the network.
Okay.
Hey, John, I'd like to follow up on two things that Bill said.
Yes, sir.
First, the value of segmentation, right? This is defense in depth. And I'm a sailor, right? A Navy guy by career. John, you were Navy for a while, right? Or Marines, I'm sorry.
Marines.
So you rode on ships every once in a while, right? We compartmentalize in ships and that's one of the reasons why we won World War II, because it was hard to sink our ships in a way that ensures that damage to one compartment doesn't flood or have a fire flow to another department. Increasingly within networks, that concept of segmentation is so very important to make sure that your back office financials aren't necessarily exposed to your strategic communications with the community and your citizen-centered services that are accessible via the web. But that segmentation also makes patching more of a challenge, which is all the more reason to be organized about that. The second piece I'd like to touch upon is Bill's illumination of the inherited trust. The systems that we have used for decades within IT, within organizations, have employed this concept of inherited trust to make sure that for the user, you didn't have to enter a password every time you just opened up a different database or checked email. So it inherently has this assume people are honest within your network approach. That should scare us all today because it is the opposite of that defense in depth, right? And high-end attackers know very well how to exploit that inherited trust. And a perfect example is what we all use today, multi-factor authentication. If you're using SMS, your smartphones as part of it, the smartphones rely upon something called SS7 or its newer instantiation diameter. That is all hop-to-hop encrypted, which is great that the hop-to-hop from one node of communications to another communication is encrypted, but then it's unencrypted to get ready for the next hop. So that's an example of inherited trust. If you're not assuming that moment in time when it's unencrypted from one hop to another hop isn't going to be exploited, then you're not appropriately addressing zero trust. And it's why you've got to be thinking about, am I monitoring throughout the totality of my networks? And am I presuming that wherever I unencrypt, an adversary can be there, so I need protections there. Bill, did I get that about right?
Yeah, absolutely, Admiral.
So it's something you both said, segregation. We talk about segregation of a network, and we talk about, obviously, so we can, if we have a conflict, not a conflict, if we have a breach here, it doesn't affect here. But I also would like to talk about a little bit on the personnel side, personnel staffing and the segregation of duties from a personnel standpoint and the importance of that. I know I was in the financial world for a very long time, and we had strict segregation of duty rules and regulations associated with the things that we could execute. And so, can you guys, from your perspective, what do you think about, first of all, the staffing? Let's just talk about staffing in general and we try to do more with less. And it leads to a lot of times where we have people who are dual, they have dual responsibilities and probably doing things that necessarily should be segregated or should be separated. Can either one of you talk a little bit about that, please? And like from your perspective, what you're seeing at the specific levels, the state and the federal levels?
Well, I'll start. First of all, the number one cost of any cybersecurity program is people, uh, whether they're your own people, organic to your staff, or your people training challenge throughout the entire organization, or the people within the contractors that you or the contracts that you outsource some cybersecurity risk functions to. So, with that as the number one cost, it's so important to be effective in your people programs. So I think it is vital that as you develop your human capital strategy for your organizations, particularly in SLED, that you embed cybersecurity in each of the responsibilities uh, uh, going forward in that human capital strategy. And so many state and local communities haven't done that yet, right? And that's the number one cost, the number one ROI element. The second piece that you alluded to is the concept of um, access control. What can the different positions do? And you gave a great example in the financial industry. Uh, I'll tell you, it's a best practice in nuclear weapons as well, right? We have A side, B side controls. If you've ever seen some of the great nuclear submarine movies, right? The captain has a key and the XO has a key, and they need both of them to turn. Some of the functions within your information environment uh, that have higher level protections, a system administrator, for example, uh, have such significant potential to do harm if compromised, that it is important that you not vest that all within a single individual. Not just because that single individual might go bad or rogue, but because that single individual's account might be compromised. So it's important to have this A side, B side mentality and to separate out the duties of system administrator, for example, from the duties of creating a new account. If you can create new accounts, and then if you have the privileges to elevate the privileges for specific accounts, you can get in at that level, elevate your privileges. Next thing you know, you're a system administrator and you own the network. So it's really important to segment the duties and do so starting with your human capital strategy, starting with your position descriptions, but taking that down to tactical implementation within your networks so that you hard code that segmented access control.
Mm-hmm. So, one thing, and this is probably a question for you, Bill, is that so I know Ivanti has specific products and specific products identity, automation, and other things associated with really automating a process and reducing manual touch points. And some of the things that the Admiral just said, if we could take a process and we could take the human element out of it and we could have consistency throughout from a secure manner and have automation execute those types of tasks. What are you seeing from from an Ivanti standpoint, from a service provider standpoint, and from your your industry experience? So what are you seeing from like where does automation fit, and how can that have an impact on an organization, especially a smaller organization at the state level that is running on sometimes a shoestring budget?
Sure, John. And what the Admiral said is absolutely right. People are critical in our cybersecurity practices, and unfortunately, they're harder and harder to come by, particularly to maintain people with strong experience in government. So it really does come back to some of the things that we mentioned just a few minutes ago, right? So we're talking about about patching, and how do we get everything patched that needs to be patched. And the Admiral said right at the top, right, automation is a key piece of this. And part of it is also knowing what to patch and what the priorities are. Being able to drive some real intelligence around what is being actively exploited, what that threat space looks like, what the vectors are for those attacks, and prioritizing those aspects as the ones to be patched first. So putting some vulnerability management and vulnerability intelligence together with automation, and then being able to drive it from a service to be able to reach out and automate not only identifying what needs to be patched, but that whole patch process, and then being able to monitor that it's been successful is really critical. And today, you know, the Admiral spoke of the OODA loop. Today, so many times, what we're ending up with is organizations where we have IT and network administrators are spending weeks identifying what's on the network, what needs to be patched, doing that analysis, all before they can put the patch process together. Much of that can be automated and really simplified. And then we just need to have those network administrators looking at what falls out, right? What are the edge cases and what didn't successfully get patched that we need to go back to and perhaps touch.
Okay. And you know, some of the things that you said there, Bill, and this is probably a follow-on for you, is I know Ivanti's been working on new technologies, and I know that they've aggressively gone out and look at, you know, zero touch, edge intelligence, discovery, a lot of the different things that in some instances were lacking in the industry. Can you, and I know the name of the product is Neurons, and I know it's relatively new to the marketplace, but can you tell us a little bit about Neurons and just, you know, maybe some of the things, because I know it's real-time reporting and there's other things from a discovery aspect. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Sure. So what Neurons does is, and they're calling it hyperautomation, and I'm not sure that hyperautomation is anything more than just faster automation, right? But I think the idea of Neurons is being able to do that that discovery, that detection of what's on the network. So all of the endpoints and the servers and switches and everything in between, and then being able to identify how do we take the vulnerabilities, a real vulnerability prioritization, and automated patch intelligence, put that together, automate the process, and bring to light those vulnerabilities that really need to be patched first, and then have that reliability of knowing that we did accomplish that, and that our security teams can look at what to do next. So Neurons drives that from a service management standpoint, drives the change management, automates the process really from end to end, to seamlessly identify, deploy those patches, and then validate that everything has been patched, and doing it in a way that prioritizes it.
Okay.
Hey, John. You know, this is so important that DHS, CISA, right, the agency at the federal level responsible for cybersecurity among all the federal agencies, is moving towards mandating now all of the subordinate federal agencies to have endpoint monitoring, and this needs to be continuous and automatic, and now fed up into CISA, so that they can correlate the anomalies that are detected at the edge. And I call it looking at the whiffs of smoke, right? That if you're not tuning your systems down to the level where you're seeing whiffs of smoke, then you're living in a false bubble of reality that everything's good with your systems, right? You have to tune your sensors down at the edge to the point where things that are just a bit off uh, are detected and then correlated with other edge devices so that you can then see the various whiffs of smoke and determine, oh, there's fire and that's where it is.
Right.
So it's so important that it is being automated at the federal level. So one, state and local municipalities should be working to do that at their level because it is a best practice, right? Two, this goes back to human capital again, right? Because for the longest time in managing IT, we would just look daily at the logs and see, oh, well, what did we see that was odd in the logs? You can't do manual log review anymore and achieve that effective correlation and direction to do something about a vulnerability or exploit that might be there. That needs to be automated, both in the correlation, but then also in the what do you do about it, that response back. So because there's an automation challenge there, it becomes a procurement challenge, right? So when you're looking at the who do we train for cybersecurity, this isn't just hire more cybersecurity engineers. You've got to start embedding cyber within all of your contracts for any product or service that has a data or information component to it, which is most of what we do at the state and local levels, right? There's citizen-centric organizations that correlate needs with resources. So cyber needs to be a part of contracting. It needs to begin to understand that, oh, well, let's not contract for a product that is going to be installed at the edge in a connected way that doesn't have the sensors to do this edge detection and up channel reporting. It means that developing the RFIs, the request for information, and the ultimate solicitation for a service to use best practice machine-to-machine capabilities to achieve that correlation of the whiffs of smoke, there's the fire, and then direct a risk reduction action is something that your contracting staff needs to be more and more savvy on. So don't leave out the business side of the cyber training challenge in your human capital strategy.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's really interesting, if we look at it, there are two primary risks to government agencies today. Unpatched vulnerabilities and phishing attacks are probably the two most prevalent causes of ransomware. As much as we'd like to think that we're on top of this and doing a relatively good job, we think back, 2017 was when the WannaCry ransomware attack came out. 4 years ago seems like forever in cybersecurity age. WannaCry infected locked up some 200,000 computers worldwide in 150 companies. And why that's important is even now, 4 years later, 2/3 of the companies still haven't patched their systems for that known vulnerability. And there was a 53% increase in the number of organizations that were affected with WannaCry between January and March of 2021, this year. So that weaponization of the vulnerabilities is exactly what attackers and nation state are really going after. And so having the people involved, having the automation process involved, and then being able to key on those weaponized attacks, bring that intelligence in and make it part of your patching process, your strategy, is absolutely critical. And then having the people that are trained to help spot that anomaly, and being able to reach out to, as the Admiral said, to the edge. So it's much more than just desktops and laptops, right? So Ivanti does a lot around protecting and securing mobile devices, iOS and Android and modern endpoints, but also IoT and industrial IoT, and being able to detect those sensors, those components as part of the network, segmenting them, protecting them, being able to identify how to secure and authorize those as well. That's all really critical. And it goes back to that zero trust strategy that we talked about earlier.
So, and to add to this, and maybe an additional question to this is that, so if based upon the things that I've read on some recent studies that have come out, and we talk about IT professionals and even agencies in general feel that the impact of patching, the impact of cybersecurity on their end users is somewhat cumbersome, somewhat it kind of gets in the way. And we know there's no perfect time to patch. There's no perfect time. We try to do it in off-peak hours, and we know, we all try to develop some kind of cadence and those type of things. So Bill, if you're CTO person, you're the guy sitting in the big seat over a state-run organization, what is the first thing that you would focus on, from a management perspective on your cybersecurity program?
Well, I think it's interesting because it goes back to the DHS CDM program, right? And I think that they've encapsulated it pretty well. It's knowing, who's on your network, what's on your network, what's happening on your network, and then how are you protecting the data and applications and resources. The Admiral spoke about encryption, encrypting that data at rest, in use and in transit, making sure that we're doing that strong multi-factor authentication so that we know who's on the network and what devices are on the network. One of the things that Ivanti is doing with our unified endpoint management and our mobile device management is being able to tie the user, their device, their mobile device. And today, mobile devices are the predominant way that people are interacting with a network, and citizens particularly. So being able to tie the user and their iOS or Android device together, binding it with that credential and that strong authentication, and then validating the network that they're coming from. Is it an authorized network? Or is it a risky network, something like at a coffee shop or in a hotel or at the airport? And then being able to make sure that not only are they authenticated, but they're authorized to access whatever the resource or data or app is, and whether it be on-prem or in the cloud, or a mixture of the two, and being able to do that continuous reauthorization every time they change, every time it's a transaction or they change from one app to the next, and being able to do all of it at the speed of the internet.
Yeah, and I would just add on top of the chain that Bill described very well, the behavioral analytics.
Yeah.
Are those devices, is that individual with that device in the location, are they utilizing the network consistent with their function, with their role-based authorization? Or are they going into databases that they'd have no legitimate reason to go into? So there's a behavior analytics on top of that as well.
Absolutely.
So, Admiral, when you were with the FCC, and this kind of goes into some of the things Bill just said. So, we were in the FCC. You're responsible for oversight of, threat protection for thousands of agencies, thousands of organizations. What, from your perspective, what were the things that you saw the most, and things that you and your organization, your team would address almost on a daily basis? I'm sure, was there any kind of consistency in what you were seeing out there in the field?
Yes. Once you get past the largest 10 or 15 service providers, the organization around cyber programs atrophied pretty quickly. And some of the smaller companies that are service providers, 5, 10, 20 employees, serving maybe 1,000 households in a community, they don't have recognizable cybersecurity programs. So it's very important to be thinking about supply chain at the state and local levels and understanding where your services are coming from and what their attention to cybersecurity is. I would point to the Petya and then the not Petya attack. Right, the not Petya attack wound up having over $10 billion of costs globally. One company, Maersk Shipping, indicated they had $1 billion in operational losses. Maersk Shipping had vessels at sea that stopped for 3 days because of this supply chain attack. And it occurred through something they were supposed to do, patching. Right, but the patching came from a source that was itself compromised. So it underscores how even large, well-run, well-funded companies can be attacked. So it's important to also have a supply chain focus to your efforts and ensure that you're not having the hubris that says, "Oh, we got it all figured out." That you really need to be increasingly savvy about the companies and the service providers that are supporting you, that will reduce risk, it won't eliminate risk, and couple that with the strong cyber hygiene that we just discussed, right, with endpoint management, CDM, the continuous diagnostic monitoring, and the automation of the correlation of anomalous indications generating activity intended to, in the moment, reduce risk, compartmentalize a potential damage.
Okay, thank you, sir. And Bill, this is a question about. I would like to ask you a question about endpoint patching, third-party patching, and so obviously the Admiral just spoke about it, and you talked about that supply chain and the things you have to focus on that's external to your organization, and I know Ivanti has some exceptional products when it comes to third-party patching, but things that I've read recently have come up where a lot, and I would say a large percentage of the breaches that we've had in 2021 and 2020 were associated with third-party patching or the lack of. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe a little bit about what Ivanti offers?
Sure. So I think a lot of it comes back to knowing what the devices are and what the applications are, but then figuring out how to get those patches deployed, right? Because what we've seen is that Ivanti did a study recently, and it was 62% of IT and system professionals said that the business was requesting that they delay putting on patches because of the impact to the business. And John, it's what you alluded to a little earlier. So part of what we want to try and do is to figure out what that prioritization is. It goes back to the prioritization and patching, and then also to that automation and being able to set up the change management process and automate that so that we can do the service level agreements, we can meet those requirements, and still get those patches out. But one of the things that we're doing for DISA right now is to help automate that patching across a number of different entities for DISA. And part of it is pulling those patches down and then testing the patches before they get rolled out. You know, I think that's what we saw with SolarWinds, and it's also what we've seen with any number of third-party patches that come to us. They need to be validated, and we need to check those before we roll them out across the organization. So doing it in a dev environment, in a sandbox, so that we can validate it, and then knowing how that patch should act and operate, so that we're aware of where there may be anomalies or devices that didn't get successfully patched, so that we can make sure that we go back to those.
Hey, Bill, the Defense Information Systems Agency, DISA, right, has responsibility for DoD information networks all around the world, right? It's a huge task that they have, 4 million users, and then that doesn't fully include the defense industrial base that supports them. It's a large enterprise. So what you just described, the automation of all of that, is certainly important for getting the patching job done. But SolarWinds also reminds us that even high-end companies, in this case Microsoft, and high-end, well-funded organizations like DoD, can be compromised. So it's important that that as you use that automation to recognize its value in your respond and recover phase, that if you do, and I shouldn't say if, when, right? Your organizations that have significant value to their information uh, uh, are sooner or later going to be compromised. It's just the nature of the cyber criminals out there that they're going to keep trying until they get in. So you need to be thinking about respond and recover as well. And the automated capabilities that you just described in patching are also so important when, in fact, you do identify the malware or the code that was compromised, to be able to, across your entire enterprise, affect a change that is universal enough that the attacker that got in can't just see it changing and then scoot over to now a part of the network they still have trust with that has had the change applied. So what you just described is so important in response and recovery as well.
Absolutely. And part of the way that we're combating ransomware is to make sure that we have systems backed up, all of the systems, everything, including the customizations. But then the flip side of that is to actually validate that you can recover from those backups that you've stored off-site, and that you regularly test your incident response plan. Your continuity of operations plan is something that has to be tested on a regular basis. Do your folks know what their role is and how to do that recovery, and be able to get back up and running?
Yeah, and not just know, have they exercised it?
Exactly.
Big difference between
And
book
that's
knowledge and having done it.
And I apologize, gentlemen. We're that could be a whole nother webinar, because we could definitely talk about disaster recovery. We could talk about ransomware and just the touch backups, the full backups, everything that's we all know, not necessarily we all do. So
Right.
but that could be a separate discussion within itself. So we have another question that we talk about the state level. We talk about the lack of potential resources at the state level. And Admiral, I know that again that when you were at the FCC, you're responsible for a lot of things that are associated with the state level. From your perspective, where would you start? Where would you start as an organization at the state level to address all the things that we're discussing today?
Yeah, if all this seems overwhelming and you find yourself having maybe chased last attack to the point where you just don't have a coherent program, I'd recommend taking a step back and apply the 3 A's: assess, appreciate, and address. So this is essentially the risk management framework, right? That you first uh, identify your cyber universe, your inventory of systems, services, processes, data that is vulnerable and or interconnected. Second, after you do that assessment of your cyber universe, identify known vulnerabilities within that, identify areas that aren't currently covered, you then move to the appreciation phase, where, as Bill said, you really want to prioritize among the different shortfalls you have, because you're not going to have the money to do it all at once. And you'll need to look at your assessment in the context of your organization's mission or your business goals if you're a company. And in that appreciation stage, then determine what are the most important factors to address affirmatively, to reduce risk in. And risk, of course, is probability times impact, right? So things with a lot of huge impact, even though they may have a low probability, may be the right risk reduction targets. So in that third phase, you need to address risk. And you certainly can spend the money to reduce the risk by fixing the problems. That's the most satisfying, but you won't have all the money in the world to do that. So there will need to be some elements that you potentially outsource. There will be some elements that you may want to insure against. Insurance can be really helpful in the response and recovery to ransomware. And ultimately, there's going to be risk that you affirmatively decide to accept. And it's so important that you not just say, well, I'm just accepting risk, but that you categorize that risk for which you've accepted, because you're going to iterate in that assess, appreciate, address regularly as the adversaries continue to evolve their practices, as you continue to build your internet of useful public things that makes up the new IoT environment. So assess, appreciate, address.
Thank you, sir. Truly appreciate it. But we're at time, and so I really would like to say thank you to Bill. Thank you for and Admiral. The time that you guys have spent with us, it's invaluable and it's truly appreciated. I want to say thank you again, and for all those out there who submitted questions, and like we said earlier, what we're going to do is we'll respond to your questions. We're obviously run out of time, but we'll respond to your questions via email, and we'll get back to you. But I truly appreciate it, gentlemen, and thank you for your time.
Yep. Thanks, John. Thanks, Admiral.
Yep. Thank you both.